All right, everybody. I propose we start. So welcome everybody on already the 19th meetup, and this month we do it in collaboration with SmartBear. And the subject of today is achieving high quality APIs through empathic design and collaborative API governance. And Frank and Alex are going to, in a couple of minutes, walk us through this story. Yeah, I think for the majority of you, I think it's already clear what we do with API Community Belgium. So we basically want to connect you or connect the people behind the Belgium API landscape to basically share knowledge, experience, and emerging trends through monthly meetups like this one. Just a small recap also for everybody. How can you reach us? So you can use our website, apicommunity.be. You can find us on Meetup to subscribe to our meetups like this one, meet.apicommunity.be. You can find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and also since a couple of months, you can also find us on Slack. So basically chat.apicommunity.de. And there you can always get in touch with all the people behind this community and also other community members like you. Yeah, so that's new one. I think the majority of you probably know how Slack works. So basically chat.apicommunity.be and you can get in touch with us. Just a recap also on our sponsors that make an event like this happening. So I'm not going to read all the logos, but you can basically see them. So I would say for all the partners, thanks. And then the agenda for today. So we have a 40-minute presentation by Frank and Alex. And at the end, we have your question and answers. I will be the moderator of today. So you can already, during the presentation of Frank and Alex, just start entering your questions in the Q&A feature of Zoom. And at the end, we will basically then put the fire on Frank and Alex to answer them. If we wouldn't have enough time due to the amount of questions, we will ensure that everybody gets the answer on their burning questions. So we'll then just provide you the answers back offline. And then a last one, already to bookmark it in your agenda, because you would almost expect that the pandemic is over. On the 28th of April at 5 o'clock in the evening this time, we're planning to have a real meetup, but also an online meetup for those who prefer to do it online in collaboration with X-Ray, and more information will be shared in the coming days. All right, Frank and Alex, I would say the virtual floor is yours.
Great, thank you. So I will switch over and share my screen. Okay, great. So thanks so much. I'm really delighted to be here to speak with you as part of the API Community Belgium. So my name is Frank Kilcommins. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm an API technical evangelist at SmartBear. So I hope you're enjoying some lunch and looking forward to this session. So just to give you a quick overview of what we will be talking about. So we will do introductions. So partially I already did mine, but we'll also include a 10,000-foot overview of SmartBear, and then Alex will do the same for advanced. Take a little bit of a look then as to what's happening in the API industry in 2022 and how did we get there. And I always think it's interesting to look at how the relationship between business and technology has evolved and what are today's customer and consumer expectations. That will then lead into us discussing a little bit about some of the challenges that we see from a SmartBear perspective across the API industry and the role of governance and standardization in empowering and enabling organizations to deliver consistent APIs at scale. We'll then focus and deep dive very much into the importance of good API design and why empathy for the consumers of APIs, as well as empathy for the teams that are producing APIs and providing a very collaborative environment, leads to delivering high quality APIs. And then we'll move on to the real fun stuff, which is hearing from Alex and getting a demo as to how advanced have approached their API strategy and their design-first approaches, and how they're maximizing their effectiveness with tools like SwaggerHub and other open source offerings. And then, as Peter mentioned, we will have Q&A at the end. So really looking forward to that. We'll also have a couple of polls throughout the session just to kind of get some interaction and some participation from you as well. And it's always very interesting for us to receive some feedback on the fly from the participants. So with that, I will just launch the first poll, and I'm just putting it on the screen here for the benefit of on-demand viewers. So that is launched. So please participate if you can, and we'll show the results in a couple of moments. So a little bit about SmartBear. Well, we are a global company headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts, and we've over 700 employees spread across 15 global office locations, many of us working remotely now, of course, as is the current conditions. We have over 36,000 customers and 16 million active users of our products. Open source is something that's very near and dear to our hearts, and we sponsor and steward 3 open source initiatives, as well as being a founding member of the Open API initiative. And for well over a decade, SmartBear has been delivering high quality products and providing world-class customer support. And looking at our products and tools, they really do span the full spectrum of the software development lifecycle, from BDD to API design, from test to test management, to automation and optimization of CI/CD flows with all of the tools that are out there that you would expect to do that. We have some rich code review and artifact review capabilities, as well then more on the production side, having the synthetic monitoring and observability tools. And these are all aimed at ensuring our customers can deliver high quality software faster and in a repeatable fashion. And now I'll hand over to Alex for his intro, and he can give an introduction into Advanced.
Thanks, Frank. So as Frank already said, I wanted to do it myself and echo and say thanks to everyone for letting us come and chat about APIs today. My name's Alex Savage and my pronouns are he and him. And I'm here representing Advanced, who we've got a little bit of information about on the screen today. So Advanced, we're a long-term SmartBear customer, but I'm here to chat about APIs because it's something that I love doing. We love using them, we love teaching people about them. So hopefully we can teach yourself something today that you can go away from and share with others. So a little bit about Advanced. So Advanced, I'm the head of integrations and the API Center for Enablement. And that's where we provide the tooling, the guidance, the strategy all around APIs and integrations. And that goes out to our worldwide development teams across our group. While it's possible some of you today might be using Advanced software, I'm not sure how much we have in Belgium. We've got a global reach and we are growing, but perhaps you have, perhaps you haven't. In the UK, we're the 3rd largest enterprise software and services supplier, and we've got aspirations to be #1. As you can see from the diagram, we've got some logos there. We talked about some of our locations. So we're very diverse. We grow through acquisition, and we've really focused ourselves on these ideas of verticalization. So we've got legal, education, health and care. We look after about 14 million patients. We handle hundreds of millions of pounds of charity money. And before COVID, I wish it was still the case now, we were sending about 10 million sports fans through turnstiles at some of the biggest sporting venues in the country. So it's a little bit less than that now because of COVID, but hopefully it'll pick back up and we'll back out seeing sports and seeing people face to face. Really, where our API obsession grew out of is we've launched a new platform called My Workplace. It's fully API designed first, all run through SwaggerHub, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later. So keeping it short, great to be here, and back to you, Frank.
Thanks, Alex. I'm just going to end the poll, and I'm going to just share the results because I think it's interesting for everyone. Don't know if that came up on screen.
Not yet.
Maybe now. Well, if not, I can tell you that we have designers and developers coming in at 32%, architects at 27%, QA and API testers at 14%, business or IT analysts at 9%, and then product folks at 14%. And we have a few just API curious as well. So that's all great. It's a nice diverse demographic, which is what we really like, because building good APIs takes a full community. It's not about any single persona or individual. Okay, so to get a sense of where we are from an API perspective in 2022, I always think it's really interesting to look a little bit at how the relationship between business and technology have evolved over the last couple of years. And technology has now really moved into the center of business. So at a certain point, way back when, organizations and companies began to realize that it's cheaper to use technology than moving paper-based processes. So there was this concerted effort to replace paper with computers. Then at a certain point, collaboration became more critical, and companies realized that they could get things done better with technology. So technology began to become more relevant. And then it eventually became differentiating. So organizations quickly realized that they could do things better with technology than without, and they really saw it as driving a competitive advantage. So technology really bubbled up into the business and formed part of value enablement. And then looking at where we are today, well, at least in the vast majority of companies that have gone through any form of digital transformation, technology is fundamentally part of the business. So everything that we do is essentially technology. It's all backed by technology. And when we want to do something, we're thinking about what technology options we have and how we can operate in a better way with technology innovations that are around us. So modern business really has technology at its heart. And then if we zoom a little bit into that, I like to think about APIs as being that bridge between technology and business, because APIs, after all, act as the conduit for value in the digital economy. And then maybe looking at how APIs themselves have evolved along a similar time frame. Back in the late 90s, early noughties, service-oriented architecture was the big thing. There was lots of point-to-point integrations, and sub-services were very, very common. That evolved with the onset and the popularity of the REST architectural style, and organizations began to realize that exposing their capabilities as APIs was really valuable, and they could have more consumers of a single API, and kind of moving away from that point-to-point integration. And then as the architecture within organizations moved from kind of monolithic into more composable architecture and breaking down the silos and breaking down monolithic systems, microservices as an implementation pattern for APIs really took off. And consumer expectations have also evolved with this. So back in the days of service-oriented architecture and point-to-point integrations, APIs could be regarded as being a delight for a customer. So they might be differentiating from a company perspective. Moving more into the 2010 periods, it was more just good to have APIs. So there's a higher expectation that your competitors and or yourself as a company will have APIs and exposing your capabilities. Whereas as we look today, APIs are really table stakes. Consumer expectations have never been higher, and they expect that they can consume the value proposition of a company into the digital ecosystem or into the platform that they want to participate in, which may no longer be part of your proprietary software that you yourself might have traditionally offered. So every company really is a technology company or even an API company in some shape or form. And as a result, the demand for developers is exploding. And it's not just traditional technology companies. If we look at some of the lists here, we see that it's financial services companies, healthcare companies, retail companies, all competing to get the best developer talent that's in the market. So when we ourselves at SmartBear are building tools for developers, for teams and different personas involved in delivering software, the experience of that environment is crucial. So as much as possible, you want to strive to meet developers where they are so that they can have an immersive experience to keep them as long as possible in their productive flow. You don't want them to have to deal with context switching. So developer experience leads to better consumption of your products. And exactly the same is applicable in the land of APIs. We build APIs to be consumed. So providing a good immersive developer experience enables APIs to be consumed. We don't want to spend months of time, budget, and effort delivering an API product that's not going to be consumed. So getting that consumption pattern right can actually be differentiating from an API strategy perspective. So, why should we care about this proliferation of new digital ecosystems, services like no code, low code, the emergence of new business models and new platforms? Don't forget all of the thousands of organizations that are still in the process of migrating to the cloud. Well, the main reason we should care as part of kind of this community group here is that, it means more APIs. So there's going to be more and more APIs out there. And this is coming back in our own surveys that we run at SmartBear. We're hearing this from all of our customers. And it's also coming back from analysts in the industry. So, Gartner, for example, are predicting a 37% increase in investments in APIs in 2022 alone, as well as a 56% increase in the consumption of API products over the next 2 years. And back to what I said about every company being an API company in some shape or form, like if we look at the Forbes Top Cloud 100 for 2021, 99 of those had easily discoverable public or partner APIs. We're all API fans here, so this is great news, of course. This is exactly what we want to hear. But, it does come with its own challenges. So to deliver on all of these trends that we're seeing, there is a proliferation of APIs. So there's more APIs being produced, there's more APIs being consumed. Not alone are organizations trying to participate in all of these digital transactions, they're also reimagining their internal architecture. So they're continuing to decouple their backends, break down monolithic architectures into more composable units because they see that as a mechanism to reduce costs, reduce time to market, and promote innovation. Infrastructure as code is very popular now as well, and we're seeing a proliferation of infrastructural APIs. So managing the API estate is becoming a real challenge for the vast majority of organizations. Looking at what some of the industry analysts again are saying to back this up, Gartner are predicting by 2025 that less than 50% of enterprise APIs will be managed as the explosive growth of APIs surpasses the capabilities of API management tools. So they're really kind of putting it up to us from a vendor perspective, delivering tools in the API space, saying that traditional API development and management tools alone will not manage the typical organizational API sprawl. So this is something that we're very cognitive of from a SmartBear perspective. So that's one of the challenges that are out there, the sheer volume of APIs that are coming within the walls of many organizations. But the landscape of APIs is also getting more complex. There's more API styles out there. There's more protocols, there's more API specifications and versions of specifications, and there's more and more technology stacks. So having kind of multifaceted API or integration architectural offerings where you're making your capabilities available across multiple styles of APIs is becoming much more common. And it really does make complete sense because we all need to be aware of the law of instrument, which is trying to solve every problem with the tool or the pattern that's familiar to you, because you really need to assess the problem that you're trying to solve and then make a determination as to what's the best API style to solve that problem. So that leads to more complex landscapes. So we do need to be aware that that is happening. And because of this, because teams are under pressure in dealing with all of this increased complexity and increased demand to get more and more APIs out there, we're seeing that it's causing quality issues to be leaked into production. And this is causing real problems for organizations. So it's causing them to miss project deadlines, miss milestones, to actually, more importantly, lose customers and experience brand or reputational damage in the marketplace. There's security vulnerabilities being leaked out and organizations are experiencing security issues and security incidents because more of their estate and more surface area is being exposed to the internet. This is also kind of a default result of all of the migrations to the cloud that we're seeing. And one of the main challenges that the industry wants to see addressed to try and ensure that poor quality doesn't leak into production is to have a better way to manage standardization and governance across their estate of APIs. So they want to reduce the cognitive load for teams. They want to calm the API chaos that's happening, and they want to reduce the collaboration costs across the different, maybe feature-oriented teams. So if you can have clear communication around the rules and decisions at an organizational level, then you actually can empower teams to be more atomic and more decentralized, because they don't have to try and solve problems that have already been solved at an organizational level. You know, without standardization, on the flip side, API delivery approaches can become bespoke. Developer productivity as a result will decline, and that will cause an increase in costs and increased time to market. And the general quality of that API will wane over time, and that has the worst impact of all, which means that your API will have decreased reach or a shorter time to live. I would also say it's very encouraging to see security creeping up to number 2 on the list of our State of Software Quality API report for industry challenges to be solved, because APIs are handling more and more of our personal and sensitive data. So it's crucial that we can keep them secure in a standard way. And again, it's not just the SmartBear surveys that are finding this. Gartner is also telling us the same story, that API design guidelines provide developers with the information they need to create APIs in a consistent fashion. And this increases the usability and therefore the adoption of APIs. So everyone is more or less telling the same story, but you know, how can we start making sure that this can happen? And from a security perspective, I really like the next statistic, which is coming from one of the other partners of this community, Salt Labs, and they're telling us that API attacks were up 348% in the first half of 2021. And that's quite astonishing. And that's compared to the second half of 2020. And this is just going to increase again as more of the surface area of our estate is exposed to the public domain. And standardization is not just about any single phase of the API lifecycle. And what is the API lifecycle? Well, this is kind of a generic representation of it, but it's all about taking and analyzing the problem that you're trying to solve and moving that through a design, development, test, documentation, and deployment phase, and doing your best to receive feedback as quickly as possible along all stops along that journey. And every time you need to make any change to an API, you naturally have to go right through this process again. So it's very much like one lap around a race circuit, but there's many, many laps throughout the life cycle or throughout the race. And this lap around this API lifecycle is fraught with challenges. You know, teams are dealing with the sheer volumes of APIs that are out there. They're trying to deliver them consistently. They're trying to make sure that the API addresses the problem that's trying to be solved. And they're also not reinventing the wheel. So not building an API that might already be present within the enterprise, but they just do not have an easy way of finding it. Like the earlier in the process, you can actually find bugs, the cheaper they are to solve. And you want to make sure when you get up to the point of publishing your API, that has everything needed to ease the burden for API consumers. And governance and standardization is really all about building effective API teams. So you cannot build an API with useful functionality based on guesses about what users need. So you need to empower the teams to focus their time on the actual real world use cases that they're trying to solve, rather than being caught up in API related tasks. And by that, I mean, you know, dealing with how do we do pagination? How do we do authentication? How do we do caching, etc.? You want to take care of that and have that standardized across the full estate of APIs and make it very, very easy for teams to ensure that the APIs that they deliver conform to these standards so that they really don't have to think about them. So I really see them as guide rails and not guardrails. You're trying to ensure that teams have full autonomy to focus on delivering the functional value of the API and not be caught up in technical decisions that have already been addressed. So putting the consumer of the API before yourself as the producer is what's really important. So focus on the needs of a developer from a consumer side, and then at scale, you can focus on the needs of a developer from a production side as well. And don't neglect other personas that might be assessing the suitability of your APIs. You know, as we see from the poll that we ran a little earlier, there's many demographics out there. There's many stakeholders who need to understand what APIs are, because you don't want them to be regarded as a technical artifact. They are a manifestation of your business value capability in the digital world. So you need to be able to articulate the value on offer very, very quickly to aid any procurement decisions that might be happening. So I really like to say, good APIs are empathetically designed with lots of collaboration. And a quote I really like from Eric Wilde, who's part of the API Catalyst at Xway, who might be talking to you next month, I'm not sure. But he always says that good APIs are useful, findable, and usable, which is a nice way to put it as well. But what does good look like from an API perspective? Well, it's crucial to have APIs designed from the outside in. So you want your API to be an interface to the value proposition. And by that, you want to make sure that they're simple to understand and that they're solving market problems and they're driven really by real world use cases. So if you don't know the problem, you obviously can't build a good API. And APIs and API design is hard. So you need to spend the right amount of time ensuring that you're solving problems in the right way. And having an outside-in perspective really aids that. The inverse of that, of course, is an inside-out approach. And there you're just exposing the data that already exists, regardless of how easy it is to consume or use it. So you're kind of presuming that you're solving a problem. So even your internal systems might haze your focus. So you might become too implementation specific, and that will just hinder the consumability of your API. You want to make sure APIs are easy to learn. So for them to be easy to learn, you obviously have to have enough documentation. You need to have enough good examples that explain the functional use cases as to how value can be extracted from that API. And you need to have the right amount of kickstart information to enable consumers to get up and running and learn the API as quickly as possible. And a really good metric to be aware of fundamentally as part of your API strategy is that time to first hello world. So you really should set a benchmark as to how long should it be for when someone discovers and comes into contact with an API before they can make that first hello world call. So generally, and I think Twilio are a very good example where they do this very, very systematically across all of their API products, and they kind of set that at 30 minutes. So that is the time it should take from discovering an API to actually making your first call. There's other rules out there like the 3-33 rule, which is it should take 3 seconds to know what an API does. And basically you should be able to call it within 30 seconds and have some code running within 3 minutes. I personally think that's a bit too aggressive, but you need to pick something that makes sense, and you need to monitor that over time and consistently across your APIs. They also need to be easy and safe to use. So you need to have standard ways with dealing with common challenges like security, like caching, like pagination, like how you manage errors and so forth. And they need to be familiar to other APIs that you're also exposing. You need to take care of things like rate limiting, quotas, idempotency, monitoring, and feedback to the consumer. So provide ways for consumers to give feedback. Also provide libraries or SDKs in popular languages and really promote that self-service oriented aspect of enabling consumers to try it out. And don't forget about clear pricing info and API status information as well. So is the API available? If you're thinking about deprecating it or evolving it, are you also making that information available? Easy to extend, and this is such a critical one for me because I think both myself and Alex are very much fans of the design first approach, and there can be misperceptions out there that design first will lead to a big design up front, and that's not the case. You don't want to over engineer anything, and you don't want to over engineer a design either. So you need to be very careful as to how you approach extensibility. And there's a few kind of do's and don'ts from an extensibility perspective. So communication is also key. So if you're coming up with your minimal viable product of your API, you want to make sure that you're communicating that to your consumers. So you can say, hey, customer, see this part of the API, this is pretty stable. We're not expecting too much changes here. But this other part of the API over here, this is a much more immature feature that we're thinking about. So expect changes over here. Don't be afraid to communicate that information up front. And then you also need to clearly communicate an extensibility pattern that should be adopted on the consumer side and on the producer side. And, you know, must ignore is kind of a common, well promoted pattern that's out there. And that's basically informing consumers that you want them to be tolerant clients and you want them to ignore anything that they don't understand, should I say. You're making a promise to them that everything that's in the current version of the API will remain backwards compatible. Anything that will be added will be optional, and it's more an opt-in into that additional feature, but they should be able to safely ignore anything that they do not understand. And this is kind of Postel's law can also happen on the provider side. So you want to be tolerant on the provider side. You want to accept anything that you don't understand as long as the main semantics of the message are still valid. And again, only return what's valid back to the consumer. And you need to, if possible, and from a virtualization perspective and a try it out perspective, I think it's always really good to think about allowing consumers to test extensibility ahead of time. So they can test if their version of their client works with the latest minor version increment of the API. So if you provide them a facility to do that, they can safely know that their client will not break. And communication is key. So you need to communicate about extensions where you expect extensions, communicate how to deal with extensions, and then communicate about every single change that you make to your API. If I was quickly to touch on some of the don'ts, don't add required inputs. I think that's a very obvious one. Don't remove anything or make anything optional. Don't change the type of a property. So, don't change from a string into an int or vice versa. Don't change the meaning of a property by adding a new property. And I think this is one that maybe gets a lot of people out when they're starting on their API delivery. So, for example, you might have a property called active and it's a Boolean. So another recommendation is, use Boolean sparingly. But let's say you have that property called active and it has values of true or false. But then your functionality evolves and your system evolves over time. So you want to have another status to indicate that a user might be pre-registered or something. So they're not fully active, but they're also not inactive. So you introduce a new property. But because you've told other consumers to safely ignore everything that they don't understand, they're now losing the meaning of some messages. So they might assume that users are active, but actually they're active, but in a pre-registered state, so they can't use the system. So extensibility is crucial. You want your API to be long-living. So if it's going to be long-living, you have to be able to extend it safely. Appropriate to the audience is the next one that's important. So you want to make sure that the data and the information makes sense in that context. There's no leakage of organizational specific or implementation specific terminology into your API products. And you don't want to push orchestration responsibility onto the client. So anything that's hard, it should be done on the provider side, and you really should make it as easy as possible for consumers to interact with your API. And consistency, so consistency is king. You really want to be consistent. And this is where standardization and governance plays such an important role in helping teams deliver consistent APIs. And regardless of the API style that you choose, be it RESTful, be it event-driven, be it GraphQL, you want to make sure that there's consistency across those different styles. And all of the different specifications that are out there, all of the different style guides and different rules really help in asserting that consistency is going to be guaranteed. And then documentation and clear communication. I don't think that can be underestimated. You want your docs to be always accurate, to be up to date and evolve towards interactive documentation. Again, those good getting started guides, and that kind of reaffirms the easy to learn bullet that showed up a little bit earlier. And you want your documentation to be probably more than just the API specification. You also want it to be very, very use case orientated. So to help consumers navigate the different endpoints in your API to achieve a specific value outcome. And actually, that's one of the things that we're working on as part of the Open API initiative. So we have certain special interest groups. And one of those special interest groups is focused on workflows. And we're in the process of thinking and brainstorming as to how we can articulate workflows across different APIs, be they open API specification or async API, different flavors of APIs, how we can articulate a workflow to a consumer so that they can easily assert how to get something done across maybe a more complex orchestration or choreography. Security goes without saying, you know, more APIs are being exposed, more surface area is there, we need to guarantee security. And I think, you know, just really what this all boils down to is you want to ensure that as much as possible, you don't have consumers of APIs thinking about things that are not related to the functional value offering of your API. And every time I'm talking to Alex, I'm always reminded of a book by Steve Krug called Don't Make Me Think, which is all about, you know, a common sense approach to web usability, but it's so applicable in the world of APIs. You know, you don't want to make consumers think or be distracted by little nuances between your APIs. So you want to keep them as easy and safe to use as possible. And that helps you get to the point where you have good APIs. So I think, Alex, I can hand over to you now, if you want to take over for the next few slides.
Yeah, of course. You're right to carry on screen sharing because I'm having a bit of trouble with mine. So thanks, Frank. Some of the, I say some, that's incorrect. Pretty much everything what you just said really resonates with me and ourselves over at Advanced. I'm going to talk a little bit about a story, but before we get there, I wanted to share this meme that we built for a session we did last year. It's really there to try and hammer home that position of, I'm going to keep talking about design, but that design first mantra of this really happy person on the left doing their API designs and making changes with it, because you're getting that collaborator feedback from your partners, from your potential customers. And if you turn the pencil around, on the other side, there's a rubber. You make the change it, publish it again, allow people to use the mocking. So they're really happy. You're happy in design land. Whereas if you're going along the traditional route of we're gonna do some APIs, we're going to ship it to production and we're going to see what happens. And then when your consumers come back and say, hi, you missed this thing, or hi, you know, to make this appointment booking, I've got to call 5 different resources in this really pre-prescribed order. And you go, yeah, okay, maybe we could have done that better. So the only course of action now is we get a sledgehammer out, we smash it apart and we start it again. So it's really trying to hammer that home of design first is a very powerful tool. It doesn't mean waterfall APIs, still agile. We're still going to iteratively build up on there, but we're going to use the ideas that you talked about. One of the really nice acronyms I know is YAGNI. You aren't going to need it. Not really good English, but the idea there is you don't need to overthink it and think of every possible connotation or possibility. As long as you've got that, follows the standards and it is extensible, you can cover those next use cases when the time's right. Otherwise, you're putting too much time into your first release, putting delays onto it, and maybe you're not going to get the reaction that you want. So design first, rubber and a pencil, production, a big sledgehammer. So I promise you a story. It's a story about us, really, you know, a story about discovery. Where the story started is there was 2 sort of key moments for us. The first one, when I was a business analyst, a project landed on me and it said, we'd like an API manager, please. We've got one over here, but we've got 60 or so products, bunch of APIs. Let's get an API manager. And we've heard earlier from Frank that relative estimates of around 50% of APIs are managed. It means 50% of APIs aren't. We were in that aren't position for some of ours. So it's like, let's go and get it. So being a good business analyst, straight onto Gartner, have a look at the magic quadrant of what was called at the time full API lifecycle managers. So we thought, brilliant. Okay, let's have a look at some of these full API lifecycle managers. And what we learned is it wasn't just about management anymore. It was about this full API lifecycle, the quite often an infinity symbol, as Frank showed. And what we really took out of that is it's around good design and mocking and testing and exposure and bringing it all the way around to the sort of final form of monetization. And you're going to use developer portals, you're going to use tools, you're going to collaborate with people, so many different things to what we were used to doing and what people still are trying out new for today. How I try to sort of talk about that in a non-technical way is really, we want to make APIs that people consume. So people have got to be able to discover them. So that's typically our developer portals. And a developer portal and an API manager, I talk about it as a bit like a car dealership. Now, I like cars, so I'm going to try and use a car analogy. But if you put in your mind's eye a car dealership, but now I'm going to say that's an Audi dealership. So it's got a bunch of Audis. Probably lots of them are going to be grey, or at least they are in the UK. We just forecourts are full of grey Audis, but they're all similar. They all follow the same design network. They're all different. They solve different use cases, but they're instantly recognizable and they've got that brand power. So that's where we sort of looked back and said, okay, we grow through acquisition. We've got a bunch of APIs. Have they got that Audi of APIs? Is it something I want to put into this car dealership and hand over however many 100,000 euros to a provider and put them all next to each other? Have they got that consistency? And the position there was, well, no, not really. We've bought a bunch of companies, we grow through acquisition, and we've never really looked at how we could unify those. So that was the beginning. Where the opportunity arrived was what we call a lighthouse project. And this is where a team come to us and said, we want to make an integration with Shopify. How do we do it? And the traditional approach is brilliant. Okay, well, I'll go and talk to the Shopify API and I'll code some stuff in my core product, and then that's done. What we said is, no, we don't want to do one-to-one integrations anymore. We want to take this product, we want to crack open its value, provide a good quality API over the top of that, and then we're going to put something in the middle, like an integration platform. Or actually, in this case, we managed to get we had a very engaged partner who was an expert on e-commerce integrations, and said, well, if we give you an API, what are you going to do with it? And they said, well, we can build all of the integration part. So we're like, brilliant, we get 2 for 1. We get a good API and we get the integrations with our smart partner. So this is really where our SwaggerHub journey began. All of the research that we did into full API lifecycle managers, and a lot of them have design tools in them. I kind of liken them to, here comes another analogy. I like cooking. In my kitchen, I have a bunch of different knives. I don't just have one knife to rule them all that I do everything with. I've got different knives for different purposes. And what we found was the full API lifecycle managers, they kind of were the one knife to do everything with. And what we found is in the design world, it didn't really meet all of our needs. So what we said is, well, rather than buying a full API lifecycle manager, we're going to create our equivalent using a mix of paid and open source and in-house solutions to really compose what was right for us with a bunch of the right tools for the right jobs. So that's ultimately what led us to SwaggerHub. But we used this lighthouse project as a way to try something new. And then we also used it as a way to then scale out to the rest of our group. So thinking about this small project, good APIs, Frank said it multiple times. It's consistency is so powerful. You hear things about, we want the APIs to look like they came from the same team. I've got a little quote from our partner here that's come up. We ran the integration with them. It's the first time they'd ever seen design first, but we did it collaboratively with them. And the TLDR, too long didn't read, is that they said it's one of the best experiences that they'd had. So working together with us on this thing, it was quicker than what we expected. And ultimately that API has now been out there. It's used for other use cases. So we're getting that multiplicative gains of why doing design first, why worrying about collaboration and consistency. And then we're seeing that return on the investment 5-fold on what we imagined. So where did we finished? I'm going to try and finish off stuff really quickly so we can get to some questions. It's never finished is the honest answer. But what we have is a design system and guardrails with rules. And we're always questioning, anytime a new question comes up, does this positively reflect our brand? And I think another tie back to what Frank said, apps on your mobile phone and modern software looks good, it looks consistent. And the UI UX community are probably 5 to 6 years ahead of us on this. But we're now seeing the need for your API needs to do the same. Does it positively reflect your brand? Is it good quality? How does it compare to GitHub or PayPal or Stripe? Because they've got fantastically good APIs that have a low time to first hello world. And really think about, how do I allow people to get access to capabilities without having to know implementation details of what's under the hood? So I would say the call out to everybody is, think about, how have you got your idea of what the idea of APIs are? There's a bunch of different style guides. We used Zalendo's and ultimately went to our own. But how can you create great APIs developers love? How can you collaborate with them as early as possible, so you're helping to understand their needs better, and that's going to help you shape better quality APIs. I have got a very, very short demo, which I'm going to show now, if that's okay, and then we'll jump over to some questions. So if you can unshare, Frank, I'll give it a 2 minutes, just walk through. Thank you. So as I said, we're a user of SwaggerHub, and something Frank said which really resonates is meet developers where they are. So our developers are predominantly JavaScript. We love VS Code, so we're actually utilizing the SwaggerHub VS Code plugin today. So on the left-hand side, you can see all of the different APIs that we've currently got going. And I'm just going to show you one of my demo ones here. So I've mentioned before that I like cars. So we've got an API that's an inventory of cars. I don't want to talk about the pet store one. So what we've built together here is using the SwaggerHub VS Code plugin, using a bunch of other tools. We've sort of built this design system that has some guardrails on us. So I've got my API, Open API YAML here. I've got the actual docs that are live here. So the two of them together. I can use a little navigator as well to move around. But ultimately, what I wanted to point out is that we've got a bunch of errors or problems here that have been found. So you can use your standardization rules to automatically review the API to find the less important boilerplate things that you need to get solved. So it's telling me off here to say, Alex, you haven't got a 403 response, because we've got a rule that said thou shalt always have 403 responses. So I'm just going to quickly grab my 401. Let's put a 403 in there. So there we go. So we've now got authentication and authorization. I've solved the problem. The highlighting's gone away and it's gone down here. I've got a little bit of a complaint about why have I not got a maximum length on a string. So I can solve that one. And then the thing I'll leave you with is the importance of spell check in open API definitions. Once you put out the API and it goes out with /cars with a Z, I can never change that. It's a breaking change and it's going to upset my consumers. So it's so important to be spell checking your open API. So I've got here an operation ID that's wrong. So that's been solved, and it's not called cars. It's called cars like that. So it's guiding people through making sure that the open APIs that are created is consistent with your version of what an Audi of APIs looks like. And then it allows the interactions that you do have and collaborations that you do to focus on the real questions that matter. Does this API make sense? Does it provide real value? With that, I'll hand back over to you, Frank, if that's okay.
All right. Thanks for the presentation, Frank and Alex. I propose we now go through the Q&A. So for people in the audience, I would say just shoot your questions and we'll put some fire on Frank and Alex to answer them. Stefan, I will start with your question. So basically, Stefan asked, do you know a tool which allows to generate YAMLs which describe the request and response for an API?
Can you say that again, Peter? To generate YAMLs to describe the request and responses for APIs?
For an API.
So from a code first approach, is it?
I cannot answer in Stefan's place, but I assume indeed that's behind his question.
Yeah, there'll be certain tools out there depending on what the languages you're using, like Swashbuckle and InSwag from a kind of a .NET perspective are quite good out there in generating. Now they're quite heavy on annotation, so you do have to annotate your code quite heavily. There's some interesting innovations happening as well using AI to kind of auto-generate specifications as you're writing code, but none of those are really, production ready. There's some very good tool listings in openapi.tools, so we can put the link in the chat, or we can share the link so that it gets out on the YouTube channel. But that kind of gives the latest and greatest overview of all tools, both from ourselves at SmartBear, but also from all vendors that are kind of delivering tools to empower developers work with OpenAPI. So that's really the best place to go to get the list of up-to-date possibilities out there.
Yep. Thanks. Stefan, I hope that answers your question, but I tend to agree with Johan's statement that we should think about contract first. So then I move on to the next question. So you talked about API extensibility and that it's the best approach at the abstraction layers. Can you explain how you would approach it across different APIs, styles, or types?
Yeah, sure. I can take that one if you want. So like depending on the API style, like so let's say we have tunnel RPC type APIs, then we have HTTP APIs like resource, so what we kind of refer to as REST-ish APIs. We might have full RESTful APIs, which are more kind of hypermedia based APIs. Then you'll have query APIs where GraphQL is quite popular, and then of course event-driven architecture and event-based APIs. So all of them themselves come with the abstraction layers that you can focus on to where you extend. So from an RPC perspective, you might focus on building out new procedures. So you make sure that the existing procedures that are there remain working as is, and you will ensure that you only ever extend by delivering new procedures that can be invoked. From a resource URI type of API, obviously you can focus on the resources themselves. So as long as you add optional attributes and properties to the representations, you can extend those representations. You can also add new resources. So as long as the old ones remain there, you can freely add new resources. You can also add new operations for existing resources. So potentially you will add a delete method on an existing resource for an example. In the hypermedia world, you can do everything that you could do in the traditional kind of resource URI perspective, but you also have the affordance of extending and adding new links between resources. And also, of course, adding links to new resources as new resources are added as well. From a query-based perspective, I would say, you can extend the schema safely. So if you're working with GraphQL, you can extend that schema and you can add new query possibilities as well. And then with events, again, it's very kind of similar to the RESTful request response world. You can add new events, you can add richer representations to the messages that will be exchanged as part of the events themselves. So that's kind of a quick whirlwind tour, but that would be the area to extend. You always focus on that abstraction layer and make sure that everything that was currently there in the same major version is backwards compatible.
The important part of it is your database isn't an API, so don't let that control what your representations are, because that's what we've seen quite a bit in the past, where an API mimics a database table, and in order to complete some business outcome, you've got to write to 5 tables, whereas that shouldn't be what you expose. It should be what's the capabilities of our product that we want to try and do. And we always talk about in the design first world, how do I expose that capability? Somebody shouldn't have to know my implementation detail, because you know what? Tomorrow I might want to change it.
Yeah, that's indeed a good remark, because I've seen it also in the past. We should really treat APIs as proper products and not have some technical debt from the past influence their design. Time is starting to run low. For everybody in the audience, I would say if you still have questions, just put them on the chat here or send them to hi@apicommunity.be, and then we ensure that Frank and Alex get them so that they can answer them. So for every question you send us, we will try to ensure you get the right answer back. Frank and Alex, thanks for the presentation. Any last words for the audience?
Yeah, I'd just like to leave the audience with one sentence that myself and Alex were kind of talking about, and it's our perspective on how we approach the problems that we're trying to solve. And it really is, collaboratively designed APIs which address consumer problems with empathy for the people that are consuming them, will live longer and will deliver actual business outcomes. So that's really the way we approach everything that we're trying to do from an API perspective. And design first really kind of buys into that because it separates you from the implementation and it keeps you focused on the real world problem that you're trying to solve and cater for the needs of the consumers who are trying to have a problem solved through your value proposition.
Yeah, thanks. For the audience, just a gentle reminder. So we plan to have the first real life event again after the pandemic on the 28th of April at 5 o'clock in the evening, but we will also stream it. More information will be announced in the coming days. And I thank everybody for attending and Frank and Alex for the presentation.
Very welcome. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Talk to you all later and have a pleasant further day, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you.